Really does describe what was going on in court this morning. There were motions before the jury was brought in to address a taped phone call that the prosecution wanted to examine today. And they put a witness on the stand. I believe his name is Robert. I've lost his name for a second. I'll pull it up in my notes here because I want to make sure you know who we're talking about here. Robert Shalakas. He was a BLM law enforcement investigative agent, and he, along with Agent Mike Johnson, called Ryan Bundy on March 17th of 2014 to, in his words, ascertain what the Bundy's intentions were regarding the upcoming or the impending cattle impoundment. Now, they taped this phone call, and so it's very obvious as you listen to that phone call, and they only used excerpts of it. There was just select excerpts of, they had roughly 45 minutes worth of the call taped. It actually started before the tape was running, and there was 45 minutes total. They used maybe 13 minutes of clips in the courtroom, but it's very clear that what they were trying to do was show that Ryan Bundy was spoiling for a fight, or otherwise just was not willing to be reasonable with the government. And this is where it got interesting, because when the prosecution made its case, well, look, here we have this agent testifying, and playing these clips. Yes, that was Ryan Bundy. Yes, that was him saying, we're going to do whatever it takes to protect our cattle. There was a point in there where he was asked, what can we do? And this was by Agent Johnson. What can we do to avoid any kind of physical harm or physical situation or risk? And Ryan very clearly answered him. You can start adhering to the Constitution. You can start recognizing that we have rights that are being abridged and that are being attacked here, and you can just not show up. Now, when the prosecution, did their questioning, it was all about, he told us we should just not show up, giving the impression that's all he said. And then Ryan had a chance to cross-examine this agent, and he made him point out that no, that wasn't all that I said. It wasn't just a matter of, don't show up. It was a matter of there are rights that are at stake here. You're not adhering to the Constitution. All of that took place in front of the jury. So that was a positive thing. The agent who was on the stand, obviously very practiced. He was very careful not to refer to the land as range, or even to refer to it as, the ranch. He made sure he talked about it only in terms of its BLM, administered lands. This is, of course, to bolster the prosecution's case. And there's more cross-examination that was going on after that, pertaining to whether or not they had recorded another phone call with another member of the Bundy family. And in fact, the suggestion was made that maybe the government had approached this member of the Bundy family and had offered some incentive, either clemency or maybe even monetary compensation, for providing them with information. And one of the attorneys suggested, I believe it was Brett Whipple, suggested that sounds like a bribe, and the judge was not happy about that, and she shut that down right away. In fact, we had a little meeting after the jury was dismissed and before everybody went to lunch, where she talked about how to handle that. Water rights have been an issue here, and again, just to understand, the Bundys, and Ryan makes this very clear in this taped phone call, the Bundys are not claiming to own land. They are not claiming to have title to the land, but they are claiming to have access to pre-existing water rights and forage rights, and the access that goes along with that. And this is a part that I fear a lot of people don't understand when they say, well, they didn't pay their rent. And as Ryan so clearly explained in his opening statement, you don't pay rent for things that you own. And they owned those rights. If you think of them as an easement, that guarantees they would have access to these regardless of who holds title to the land. We're going to head back into the courtroom here in just a few minutes, and I'll be doing another update in just a few hours to let you know what's going on. One thing I would ask you to consider is if you're tempted, or people who are tempted to just kind of play this off as, well, this is just ranchers versus the feds. It's been going on. The Sagebrush Rebellion, we all heard about it growing up. It's not that abstract, and it's not something that's so detached from you that it would never affect you. What we're seeing play out in this courtroom, and the names and the issues that are involved, are symptoms of a much larger problem, which is our federal government is exceeding its bounds and is no longer acting as a servant that guarantees and protects our God-given rights, but it's acting as a master that knows no limits to its power. That's a big deal. And if it's not affecting you at the moment, it will at some point. So kudos to the people who recognize this and are willing to stand with the Bundys and to encourage them in their stand and being willing to take the hits for a battle for freedom that very few people understand and fewer still are ready to stand up and join. That's our update for now. We'll be back to tell you more in just a few hours. Hi, this is Bryan Hyde, and just wanted to check in and let you know how this Monday in the courtroom concluded. This was a good afternoon. One of the things that had been battled out throughout the morning by both the prosecution and by the defense was a phone call taped between a BLM agent, Mike Johnson, and Ryan Bundy. This was taped on March 17th of 2014. And it was part of an effort on the part of two BLM agents. Agent Shalakis was partnered up with Agent Johnson and sent to Bunkerville to contact the Bundy family, tell them about the impending enforcement of 2 court orders to trespass their cattle, and then also to ascertain the Bundy family's intentions and to see what exactly can we expect, because in the past, I think they said 6 times, maybe it was 5 times in the past, this was the 6th time, the BLM had tried to trespass their cattle and had been thwarted. Interestingly enough, the sheriff was the one who stepped in and said, no, this isn't going to happen before. Nonetheless, they had taped this phone call with Ryan Bundy, and this morning, excerpts from it, I think a total of maybe 15 minutes of that phone call, were played to members of the jury. But the phone call itself was a good 45 minutes long. The defense strenuously objected and said, look, they need context. The jurors need to have context if they're going to hear this. And the judge and, frankly, the prosecution relented and said, okay, if you want to enter this into context, then let's go ahead and play the whole 45 or 46 minute long phone call. And they did. And this was another one of those little miracles where Ryan Bundy probably had no idea that it would ever be used for this purpose, but Ryan Bundy got to school the jurors on a number of reasons why the Bundys weren't just going to go along with these court orders. Now, when you hear people say, well, it's because they're scofflaws and they just don't respect the rule of law, that leaves an awful lot out of the picture. I mean, if that's the point of view we're going to take, that's very easy to do if we only define things in terms of legal and illegal, meaning anything that some politician or some bureaucrat puts on a piece of paper becomes legal and therefore right, and anything that they say no to or anything that would prohibit them from carrying that out is somehow wrong. But Ryan was able to explain in this 45-minute phone call with Mike Johnson, wow. I mean, it was intense, and you heard Ryan very animated and very determined at times to explain to this agent. And I'm going to walk you through just a few of the things here, just because he covered so much. One of the things that the agent wanted to know is there going to be a physical problem? In other words, he's asking, "What we intend to come take your cattle. What do you plan on doing about it?" And Ryan's answer was the same that his dad had given, for years. Whatever it takes. And you got to understand, this is not just because we're going to stand up to the feds for no reason other than they're the feds and that's what you do. The purpose behind it is because they have rights and they are willing to stand up and assert those rights. And the fact that there are not very many people around today who are willing to do such a thing, that's more of an indictment of the masses than it is of the Bundys who are willing to stand for what they believe in. Ryan touched on a common thread that he and this BLM agent shared, and that is their LDS faith. And Ryan schooled him about LDS scripture, what it says about the Constitution, how the LDS people believe the Constitution is a divinely inspired document, and how they believe that they are commanded to uphold that document and to uphold it for the sake of freedom for everyone. And this is something that Ryan was trying to explain. He talked about the 28 enumerated powers in the Constitution, outside of which government does not have authority to do things. He talked about the Supremacy Clause, because this is one of the first things that Agent Johnson brought up to him. Well, I've read the Constitution and I know about the Supremacy Clause. And when I say Ryan schooled him and in turn schooled the jurors, I mean he gave a very clear lesson on what this all means, why the Constitution was set up the way it was, how states' rights, how grazing rights, and they're not privileges. These are not federally created and granted privileges, and they shouldn't be treated as such. He talked about the desert tortoise. He talked about how the BLM does not make law, which was interesting because Agent Johnson talked about how, are you just going to ignore these laws we've made? And Ryan said, you don't make laws. You make regulations. And Agent Johnson agreed with him in this phone call. Ryan talked about how ranchers would support them. And he says, you don't have a right to violate another person's rights. Now, he's talking to a representative of government, and he is appealing to him and saying, just because you belong to a government bureaucracy does not mean you have the right to go around violating other people's rights. And it was a very good lesson. I don't believe it was wasted on the jurors, even though I'm pretty sure for a lot of them, they were hearing this angle for the first time, most likely. It's not something that's widely taught in the schools, and it's certainly not something that bureaucrats are going to encourage people to know about. It was telling, though, that I think I counted about a third of the jurors sitting there taking notes, maybe more. Just they were obviously paying attention. I could see them writing furiously, and there was a lot of information to be covered there. Other things, Ryan reminded the BLM, because they kept asking, well, what can we do to avoid any kind of physical problems? And he said, recognize our rights and don't come to gather our cattle. And they just kept insisting. This agent kept saying over and over, we are coming. Get that through your head. We're going to come and we're going to take your cattle. And Ryan said, we're not going to let you take our cattle. And it seems a little confrontational, but you have to understand that from the standpoint of this BLM agent, when government has spoken, the thinking is over. And no one may challenge government. And this goes back to that thinking of, if it's legal, then it must be morally correct. If it's illegal, then it must be morally incorrect. But we're trained to think in terms of legal and illegal, and unfortunately that leaves us high and dry when it comes to matters of right and wrong too often. Let's see, Ryan also talked about putting the BLM on notice, by which he meant legal notice. If you harm our cattle, then we will hold you legally responsible. Again, they asked, well, what are you going to do? I mean, it was just as open, what do you intend to do? We're coming to take your cattle. What are you going to do about it? And Ryan kept saying, whatever it takes. And the agent would press him again, what do you mean? And Ryan just said, that's all I'm going to tell you, whatever it takes. You interpret that any way that you want. Now, it's interesting that government chooses to interpret that in the most violent way possible. And I think that's going to come out further on in the trial when they start talking about why did they send a 200-man armed to the teeth task force to impound cattle? Because they interpreted whatever it takes to mean not the least amount of resistance it takes to resist that court order, which had been done in the past, but because they were assuming that must somehow mean bloodshed or somehow violence. One thing that Ryan pointed out to Agent Johnson is he says, you can't defend the Constitution while you're working for an organization that's in the process of destroying it. And I think Agent Johnson actually at one point said, oh, that hurts, or he said that was, he thought that was kind of a low blow. And I don't want you to get the impression that, Ryan was trying to bully this poor guy. He told him, he says, I know it hurts. I know it's a painful thing to consider, because for this agent, it means you are playing for the side that is not supporting and upholding freedom. And that would be a painful thing. And frankly, there are a lot of people who have yet to have that kind of contemplation or that conversation within their own hearts of, can I be a good individual when my job requires me to do things that are not good? So that was how it ended up. They're going to hash out a few things starting at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning out of sight of the jury. The jury should be back in the courtroom tomorrow at 1 p.m. There was a conflict with a juror who apparently has been subpoenaed for something else, and so it may possibly be bumped to Wednesday at 1 o'clock. But I don't know how to tell you. It's not like we can say there was a clear winner. The judges, or the boxing judges' decision 3-1 said that this is who came out ahead. All in all, the bright spot was Ryan was able, through this phone call, to get some very vital information imparted to those jurors. How much of that is going to resonate with them and make a difference, that's anybody's guess. But the fact is, it came out, it's on the record, and they cannot unhear what he was able to teach them. And there was a lot of meat on that bone. I mean, he was able to throw them some very good information. That's our report for this evening. We'll see you tomorrow.